Okay, let's get started. Ready? Okay. Obviously, I'm not Dylan. Dylan is in Louisville, Texas, giving a presentation down there. I guess many congregations are having their summer series. I kind of look at it as the preacher retirement fund. They just all talk amongst each other, and we'll have all these, and they bank those checks, and they don't cash them until they're 65. Is that right, Doug?
That's right, Bill.
No. The check was already disposed of 40 years before. So that's why I'm teaching tonight. It's going to be still the apologetics theme, and tonight, lesson 10, we're going to be talking about some Old Testament prophecies and how Old Testament prophecies can fit in to apologetics. Before we get started, let's have a word of prayer and just get into the study. Father in heaven, as we've gathered here tonight, we're going to take this time to study some from your word. We hope, Father, that the time can be beneficial individually, collectively, for the cause. We know, Father, you would have us to continually grow spiritually in our knowledge of the word, and hopefully the next few minutes that we spend together will aid us in doing that. We ask that you help us out, watch over, guide this congregation here as we strive to spread the word, and we want to let others know about it, and just we ask for safe passage for Dylan and his family who are down there with him, and they'll be back here in the next day or two. And we're just grateful for all the things that you bestow upon us, and help us to be good stewards of all, material and spiritual. It's in your Son's name, amen. Wait a minute. Where's Savannah? Go ahead. She wanted me to make an announcement. Oh, I remember it. Go ahead.
Sandra Bagger's funeral is Monday morning. On the obituary, it says 11 o'clock, so that's probably when it is. Their son told me 10 o'clock, but it's probably 11 o'clock at Vondel Smith.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Sandra Bagger's funeral is Monday at 11 o'clock, Vondel Smith on Southwestern. And I know what Savannah wanted me to tell you. If you've volunteered to do VBS work, she'd like to meet with you real quick after class tonight. Okay, let's get started. Like I said, Jane's doing good? Oh, that's right. That's right. You were talking about it. Jane had knee replacement, and she'll be home tomorrow. Okay. Like I said, Dylan asked me a few weeks back to take his class, and I decided I probably knew more about Isaiah and the boys than I did about Polycarp and the boys, so I decided to do it on Old Testament prophecies, and specifically their fulfillment and how that fits into apologetics. Just as a quickie review of apologetics, the definition, Dylan went over this. I think I have it on the Greek root word on the outline there. I won't try to pronounce it. But that's from that Greek word. Interestingly, we got the word apologetics, and we also got the word, and I was asked this once just a couple, 3 weeks ago. How did we get apologetics and apologize from the same Greek word? How does that happen? Well, apparently and this I'm sure is very common in English, because English comes from a lot of different sources, right? and we have the Nordic influence, the Vikings, the Germanic, the French attacked in 1060. You know how I'm doing this geographically. And the Romans, I suspect, had some impact. They were there for quite a while. So anyway, a Greek word like that could be, the French could grab it from the Latin, and the Germanic people could grab it, and it ends up coming into the English language at two different times, which is how that happened. The Greek root word itself means to speak in defense. Apologetics, the working definition we've been using in here is a systematic or rational justification of a belief, doctrine, or position. Thus, if you can see this one, on all of Dylan's slides, his lead slide, he puts that reasoned defense. It's not apologetics if it's not a reasoned defense. That's why the definition systematic and rational. And because of that, I just happened to get, that didn't work, Josh. Okay, I happened to, interestingly, when you start doing a little study on the internet with a subject like this, I wake up in the morning and I get recommendations from other related type videos. It's almost as if somebody's listening to me from Google. But anyway, this one popped up and I thought it was kind of interesting. Let's see if I can get rid of this. Josh, what is this? There we go. Okay, so I heard this video, and I just thought I'd play it because it speaks to the rational reasonableness of the Scripture, and in this case, Old Testament Scripture.
Dawkins, in 1995, quote, "The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference." Here's the second quotation. This is a poem that dates back 3,000 years. Psalm 19. "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge." Which of those two better reflects, not perfectly perhaps, but better reflects the most recent developments in science? Steve?
I think the psalmist has got it right. The good Professor Dawkins, who has a talent for framing issues beautifully, nevertheless gets it wrong. That the new developments in science, especially having to do with biological and cosmological origins, are pointing to the reality of a transcendent designing creator.
Jen?
I would think the psalmist has it much, much closer.
Much closer. John? Are you going to please stick up for rationalism and which of those two?
I'll stick up for rationalism and say the psalmist has it exactly right, that this is a word-based universe. The fact that we can describe it in mathematics, the fact that biology uses language.
That's all. I just found that interesting. Those guys are pretty eminent individuals. Where did it go? Close what? Oh, I did? So I got to get it back the way I had it the first time? Well, I did what you told me. Okay, so what do we do now? I just found that interesting that those guys, and they're all bright individuals. One of them was Stephen Meyer, a geophysicist. One of them, John Lennox, the guy who spoke last, is a retired math professor at Oxford University. And the other gentleman, James Tour, Rice University chemistry professor. I don't know if he's still there. He might not be. And I've seen him, and I've seen the math professor on YouTube doing apologetics things. So they're into that too. And I was just struck with the Oxford math professor saying, I stick up for rationalism, and he's talking about the psalmist over Stephen Dawkins. I just thought that was kind of neat. Richard Dawkins. Stephen's his second cousin.
So those three gentlemen aren't connected to the church. Third cousin.
I don't know what their background is. I don't know. But they can be very good scholars of Old Testament writings and New Testament writings for that matter too. I just thought that was, we're talking about rationalism, we're talking about reasonableness, we're talking about like the reasoned defense. I thought that was kind of neat. Okay, so before we get started, what are prophecies? Blue says predictions of the future. Can be. Just general, what are they?
Prophetes means to bubble forth with information.
Yes. Here's my simple definition, and we're hitting on it. In the context of what we're talking about, in the context of Bible prophecies, in my mind, a prophecy, what are prophets? They are human beings who are channels for God's word. That's a prophecy. So it doesn't have to be future.
But there are things that are going to happen, right?
No. A prophecy is just God using an individual to convey his message to a group of people. Think of Nathan in 2 Samuel chapter 12. What's the famous line? You are the man. And he didn't say you demand, did he? He said you are the man. And what he had done was pretty bad, but it was a prophecy, right? He was speaking prophecy. He was being prophetic, and he related that story to David, and David said that guy deserves to die, right? And Nathan said, "You are the man." So prophecies do not have to be related to predicting future events. However, there are plenty of them in the Old Testament, and they're not only in the prophetic books, they're in probably all of the books. I'll show you one tonight from Genesis. And many of the prophecies from the Old Testament were fulfilled in the New Testament. And those are the ones I'd like to talk about tonight. Now, how does that fit in with apologetics? Yeah, it's confirmation. A reasonable person. It's reasonable to say, if I have confidence in this set of writings, and history tells me that this was written in the 7th century BC with a prophecy that took place, and I can document in the 1st century AD, that's a reasoned defense. And that's how Old Testament prophecies fit into apologetics. Problem is, when we were talking about manuscripts, when Dylan was talking about New Testament manuscripts, what was the apologetic aspect of those manuscripts? A couple of things. One was date. We have some 1st century manuscripts. The second one, I guess 3 things. How many? 4,500? A plethora? 4,500 plus and growing?
At this point, we have over 6,000.
6,000. And the other thing was from a widespread area. You know, it might come from Alexandria, it might come from Antioch, and they say the same thing. That's part of the apologetics aspect, because when you throw all those things together, you get a reasonable resolution to your question, or you can make the reasonable judgment that, yeah, I can believe this. And that's what we do in the New Testament. We don't really have that. Well, we didn't have that prior to 1946. The oldest Old Testament manuscript dated 700 AD, 800 AD, somewhere in that time frame, many years from. So if I'm prior to 1946 and I want to take a prophecy, a futuristic prophecy from the Old Testament, let's say, and we're going to look at this later, Daniel 2:44, and I'm studying with somebody and I say, look at this. This guy wrote this in 75 BC, and it didn't happen until 600 years later. Surely that gives you cause to believe. He said, wait a minute. Well, how do you know that was written in 560 or 570 BC? Because I happen to know that the oldest manuscript of Daniel, that's what we're talking about here, is 700 AD. I could have written in 700 AD, I could have written that prophecy. It kind of, I think the scientists call it the Biff Tanner syndrome. I wanted to see if Horace would get that. So anyway, but that you know, right? That's not real compelling, right? If that's the best you have. Well, what happened in either late 1946 or early 1947? A Bedouin shepherd stumbled into a cave close to Qumran in Israel, I guess the West Bank, which is at the northwest corner of the Red Sea. Because I knew Doug was going to be here, I included a map tonight, because he told me he likes my maps. Well, you can see where Qumran is up in the northwest. You can look to the left there, to the east, or the west, and you can see Bethlehem, which we know is close to Jerusalem. So Qumran is only about 50 miles east of Jerusalem, so it's not that far away. I envision, of course, if you think about the whole nation itself, it's not that big of an area, so the desert can't be too far away from anything, actually. But I just envision it to be way, way out in the sticks. Well, it's 50 miles from Jerusalem, but it is in the desert. So these scrolls were first discovered in late 46 or early 47, and over the next 10 years, they found 230 manuscripts, which consist of 50,000 fragments. And they were dated between the 1st century and 3rd century BC. So, call the guy up from 1945 you were studying with and tell him, I've now got proof. I now have a document that indicates that these things were written as early as the 3rd century BC. So how'd they get there? There's a Jewish sect called the Essenes, and I guess they were kind of a strict sect. They stayed to themselves, and that's why they moved out to the desert. I guess they were the first survivalists, or if not survivalists, wanted to get off the grid, so that's why they went way out there. And they were real serious about their religion, their history, the Jewish scrolls, and they toward in the first century A.D. when things were there was trouble with Rome. There was the Jewish wars where the Romans. Well, we know what happened in 70 A.D., right? And so it was close to 70 A.D. where the thought is that they wanted to preserve their history, their scrolls, and so they put them in these clay jars and hid them deep in these caves. And because of the heat, the dryness, and the fact that they were in the dark, these things were preserved for 1,900 years. And as I said, they over 10 years, they accumulated quite a few. In fact, you put them all together, every book of the Old Testament is represented with the exception of Esther. So, and just to break them down by percentages, 43% of them come from the first 5 books, 12% are history books, 26% are the poetry books, and speaking of prophets, 20% of the books are from the prophets. Everyone is represented. So it was a significant discovery in terms of apologetics, to go 900 years closer to the fact, and 100 to 300 years prior to the birth of Jesus. So that was, like I said, that was significant, and it still is significant. And then, in addition, in the 2010s, a project was undertaken to do a DNA analysis of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I saw a video on this. Apparently, dust accumulates over the years. They didn't do anything to destroy those manuscripts. They're pretty, they're not going to do that. But dust settles over the years. They accumulate enough dust, and from 26 samples, 26 manuscripts, 26 different manuscripts. They had enough DNA to do a DNA analysis, and what they found was that in those 26 manuscripts, 20 of them were written on sheepskin, 4 were written on goat skin, and 2 were written bovine, cattle. And what that did was, at least for those 2, and who knows how many of the remaining 200 and whatever, 204 I guess, would be bovine. That indicates there's no way that cattle were raised in the Qumran area. You're not gonna raise cattle. I guess you could if you had enough irrigation, but they didn't have that back then. So that indicated they came from a further distance away, which I bring that up to say, when I mentioned when we discussed the New Testament, we mentioned distance also of the manuscripts that we have. I said Alexandria and Antioch. Well, I don't suspect that these cattle were necessarily that far apart, but they certainly weren't close to the Qumran. So it wasn't only these Essenes who were storing these scrolls, it was others. I envisioned word got out, the Romans are coming. Hey, they're hiding stuff over there in Qumran. Something like that. Or maybe they just traveled on purpose, whatever. But I found that fascinating. Just the fact you could do a DNA analysis on something that old. But having said all that, just to buttress the argument that, hey, with these Dead Sea Scrolls, we now can put even more confidence, to the skeptic especially, in these Old Testament writings. Because as I said, it covers every book in the Old Testament except for Esther. So, okay, so let's, now that we can put faith in these prophecies, let's look at a few and just discuss them. Oh, I know.
Anything else, Bill, of note?
amongst those scrolls, they found a nearly complete copy of Isaiah that's almost identical to what we have today, which is a big deal when dealing with certain people for apologetics purposes,
Yeah, absolutely.
particularly people who say that the Bible has been corrupted,
Right.
because that's the same thing that
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
today.
You know, and that reminds me, with the DNA testing, they were also, they were like trying to put puzzles together with those fragments. And then when they figured out, well, this is a cow, and this is, so they were able, at least for those 26, it made the puzzle easier, yeah. Leanne and I just put together a 1,000-piece puzzle, and I know how challenging. But, you know what happened to us? They only sold me 999 pieces. You talk about frustrating. So let's look at a few. Let's look at a few prophecies. First one I alluded to earlier, Genesis 3:15. I get ahead of myself here. My idea of the Old Testament is that, and I've said this in classes before, it's the inexorable march to the cross. And why do I say that? We're going to you saw the verse we're going to pick up with. That was at the fall, if you will, when they were kicked out of the garden. From that time forward, they were lost people, no matter what period in history. Lost in the sense that they had no hope of salvation, because everything up until the cross relied on human beings. And humans, for whatever reason, weren't capable of doing it on their own. They needed help. And the help came when? At the cross. That's what I mean, the inexorable march. And I look at that Old Testament from that point of view. It was used as a, we know it's used as a tutor. We know that from Scripture. We know it was a shadow of things to come. And the things to come were all started at the cross. The three dimensions, if you will. A shadow only having two dimensions. And so, if that thing's going to be instructive, to me, when it starts talking about, hey, this is what's going to happen in the future, well, and it's going to be a whole lot better, something great is in the offing, to me, it stands to reason that it's talking about that cross. It's either talking about the king or it's talking about the kingdom. And so when I look at Old Testament prophecies that were fulfilled in the New Testament, and any of them for that matter, that's the perspective I use. And so what I'm saying is, I don't believe there are any Old Testament prophecies that have not been fulfilled. And I don't think there are any, and by saying that, I don't think there are any that have an end times fulfillment to them. You'll see that a lot. I see him pointing to the cross. Like I said, the king and the kingdom. That's the way I look at him. So, let's go to Genesis 3:15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. What do we get from that? What prophecy, what message do we get from that?
Sufferings of Christ and his victory over evil.
Yes, well, that's right. Who's the you? I will put enmity between you and the woman. The you is the serpent, right? Satan and his offspring, and the woman and her offspring. And Blue mentioned Christ. To me, and you know, I said the inexorable march. This is Genesis 3:15. That's early on, real early on. And what do we see there? There's going to be a struggle between good and evil, a constant struggle. And what's going to happen to the evil? Or what's going to happen to the good? There'll be there'll be some nicks and bruises along the way. But what's going to happen to the offspring of the serpent? A hit to the head. Okay, so there's going to be that constant struggle, and which side's going to win? That's what I see when I see that scripture. To me, that's prophetic, right? Written, I guess, through Moses, and talking about what the future holds. So,
So the you in that doesn't mean man, it means,
which you?
I will put in between you and woman.
It's the serpent.
It doesn't mean
It's the serpent.
evil. It's not the man in the relationship.
No, it's the serpent.
No, he addresses man just a couple verses.
Yeah, he does.
It's not pleasant.
Okay. So let's get into one we might think of, associate more readily with. Okay. One of my favorite. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. One of my favorite scriptures. I also like Psalm 19:1. That's another reason I played that video. What do we see here? This is Daniel chapter 2. What happens in the second chapter of Daniel? Nebuchadnezzar wakes up and he's troubled. He had a bad dream, and he doesn't know what it means. So he calls all the wise people, the magicians and the soothsayers and all the guys, the wise men. And he says, I had a bad dream. I don't know what it means. And what did they say? Well, tell us the dream. We'll tell you what it means. And basically he said, hey, I've been down that road. You tell me the dream, and I'll tell you if it's right or not, and then you can give me the interpretation. Well, make a long story short, what happened? Word gets to Daniel and his compadres. Dwayne in here? Who are the other three? Okay. I always say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but that's... I know I can always go to him. And they're going to be included in the batch that's going to be off with their heads. Actually, it says torn limb to limb. And Daniel says, hey, and they all pray on it, talk about it. They wake up, and Daniel says to the foreman, the guy who's going to take him to see the king, hey, I got this. Let me talk to the king. So we know what Daniel tells him the dream, the image with 4 different sections, gold, silver, bronze, iron, and then at the very bottom, iron mixed with clay. And then in the vision, in the dream, there was a stone, just kind of appears, and hits the feet that are made from clay and iron, so they're kind of weak, and it all comes tumbling down. And that's what Daniel is saying here. And in the days of those kings, that would be the kingdom on the very bottom. All the 4 sections are 4 different kingdoms: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And it's the Rome that is referenced there and in those days. In the days of the Roman Empire, the Roman kingdom, what's going to happen? A kingdom that shall never be destroyed will come about. So what do you think that's talking about? The church. And if you read the whole book of Daniel, you'll see it's a lot pointed toward it's messianic. An overtone of messianic prophecies flows through it. Chapter 7, 8, and 9 especially. And chapter 7, 8, and 9 match well in many instances with Matthew 24, Revelation 17. And I think that's God's way of... And how does Daniel end? Seal up the vision. It's not going to happen for a while. And how does Revelation end? Don't seal up the vision. I just see that's God's way of saying, okay, it's coming, and here's a reminder, and here's how it all ties in. Same thing with Matthew 24, Son of Man coming on the clouds. So it's a messianic book. And I like this passage here because it's pretty simple. There's going to be an everlasting kingdom, and it's going to happen at the time that that fourth kingdom is destroyed. So I like that one. Old Testament prophecies. This one here and the one after it, they're kind of easy to interpret. Why? Because Peter referred to it in Acts, right? They're not drunk. This is just the fulfillment of Joel's prophecy. And so, as you read through that, first of all, you see the nature of apocalyptic writing. Verse 30, and I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. Sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. Well, I don't think the moon turned to blood, but I think it's making a point there through hyperbole. And the day of the Lord came on that day, in terms of what Joel was talking about probably 800 years prior. And it shall come to pass that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those who escape. Mount Zion, that's an interesting concept or an interesting subject. And I'm by no means am an expert. But there was a physical, and I guess there still is a physical Mount Zion. It was right outside of Jerusalem. And as Jerusalem took on its spiritual significance, the city of David, the city where the temple was, the city where God dwelled in the temple, being part of Mount Zion took on a spiritual connotation. And if you read the Hebrew letter, in chapter 12, what is it? It compares the Jews' experience with a mountain to the Christians' experience with a mountain. The Jews had the mountain where they were fearful, right? They heard a noise and they said, no more, no more. Well, Christians, they're already there in Mount Zion. You know, in the Hebrew, book of Hebrews is designed, what's its purpose? Here's the, you guys that want to go back, here's the old, here's the new. Okay, let's go by it one by one. Okay? This. Which one is always better and orders of magnitude better? That's how Mount Zion is the significance it takes on in this situation, in this passage here. And just one more along those lines, and it's not surprising that, well, I'll skip that. Come back to that later. So anyhow, that prophecy, I've always liked that prophecy. As I said, it's easy to understand. It's easy to know the interpretation. It's easy to see how it's fulfilled. Peter uttered the words himself. Another one along those lines, and here's another one I like a lot, Jeremiah 31 through 34. I'll read it. What time is it, Josh? Okay, you've got 5 minutes almost. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant in the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Okay, so 2 covenants are mentioned there, right? The old one and the new one. And what's the difference between the two? Well, the difference I see is that one was written on the heart, and one apparently what? So what does that mean, written on the heart?
Like in a stone.
Pardon?
It's like in a stone. It's there. It's in your heart.
Right. Yeah. And where was it written to the Jews? If it wasn't on their heart, where was it?
Buying is with activity.
Say what?
Buying it with what you did.
Yeah. It was a checklist thing, right? And it became formulaic, robotic, and we use the word pharisaical, legalistic.
Well, and two, that kind of makes it everybody individualized, meaning, you know, the Lord can see, or I don't know how to put it, but they can make each person interpret it differently or other ways if they do.
Well, there's definitely an individual component to it. Got to be careful when we're interpreting it differently, though, within reason, I guess. But anyhow, it's mentioned in Hebrews. As I said earlier, here's another instance: old, new wins out, written on your heart. So, no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and his. Well, I don't need to read that. That doesn't really buttress it anymore. So that's how these Old Testament prophecies that are fulfilled in the New Testament have this apologetic aspect to them. This would have been written, Jeremiah was right before, just a little bit before Daniel. So I would say Jeremiah 600. 600. So this would have been written 600 plus years before the Hebrew letter was written. That's all I have. I could go over a few more, but I don't want to take too much time. But I mentioned I saw that video because it popped up in my recommended videos in YouTube. When I get up in the morning, usually pretty early, and a lot of times I just go to YouTube and I see if the Thunder won or lost, or how the Dodgers did. And one good thing about that, you know, you get this 12-minute video, and so I click on it, 45 seconds, and 10:35. So I don't spend a whole lot of time, but I find out who won the game. And if it's depending on the score, I might go back and pick it up. But anyhow, so I get all kinds of videos based on what I've been watching. And this is 2 days ago, this video popped up on the screen. So I was hoping you'd be here. It was the
You had hair.
this it looks like a mullet. Is that a mullet? This was the 1990 OU Nebraska game. This was, you know, when they're going over the positions, like on the first possession. But it was the picture that showed up on the front of the video, and so.
Need to make your screensaver.
I thought I'd send it to you, and I'm glad your son's here to see that. Did you ever get your picture for a game? So anyway, I appreciate your time, and see you later.